Picture this. You're traveling across Kansas in 1872, exhausted, hungry, and miles from anywhere. You see a small cabin with a hand-painted sign advertising food and rest. A beautiful young woman greets you at the door, smiling. She says she's a spiritual healer. She invites you to sit. You take the chair facing the canvas curtain. You never notice the shadow moving behind it. You never hear the hammer coming, and you never leave that cabin alive. Between 1871 and 1873, dozens of people vanished along the Osage Trail in southeast Kansas. Families searched for missing fathers. Merchants disappeared with their money. A little girl, no older than 8, was buried in a shallow grave with her father. When authorities finally raided the property in the spring of 1873, they found 11 bodies, but evidence suggests there could have been dozens more. The Bender family had turned their roadside inn into a slaughterhouse, and by the time the law arrived, they had vanished into the frontier, never to be seen again. This is the story of the Bloody Benders, the most terrifying family in American history. And if you think you know how this ends, you don't. Let me take you back to Labette County, Kansas, in 1870. This wasn't the romantic Wild West of movies. This was a brutal, lawless frontier where survival meant trusting strangers and that trust could get you killed. Towns were few and far between. Law enforcement barely existed. If someone went missing on the trail, there was no investigation, no search party. People just assumed the prairie had claimed another victim. Bandits, disease, accidents, death was everywhere, and the Benders knew how to hide in that chaos. The family arrived in Labette County in late 1870. John Bender Sr., the father a German immigrant in his 60s, spoke broken English, kept to himself. He had the cold, dead eyes of a man who had seen violence and felt nothing. Elvira Bender, his wife, a hard, bitter woman with a temper that scared the neighbors. Some said she wasn't even legally married to John. Some said she practiced dark magic. Their son, John Jr., was a giant of a man, over 6 feet tall, with a slow, unsettling way of speaking. He had a reputation for cruelty, even among people used to frontier roughness. And then there was Kate. Kate Bender was the daughter, or so they claimed. She was in her early 20s, striking, with dark eyes and a sharp intelligence. She spoke perfect English and advertised herself as a spiritual medium and healer. She gave lectures in nearby towns Independence, Cherryvale, Parsons, claiming she could contact the dead, cure illness, and see the future. People were fascinated by her. Some were attracted to her. No one suspected that she was the bait in a death trap. The Benders built a small one-room cabin directly on the Osage Trail, one of the main routes west. They put up a sign, groceries. Inside, they set up a simple operation. The front half of the room served as a store and dining area. A canvas curtain divided the space, separating the front from the back, where the family slept. Travelers would stop, buy supplies, sometimes stay for a meal. If you were alone, if you looked like you had money, the Benders would insist you stay. Kate would smile, Elvira would cook, and they'd offer you the seat of honor, the chair with its back to the curtain. The disappearances started almost immediately. In late 1871, a man named Jones stopped at the Bender Inn and was never seen again. Then a traveler named Benjamin Brown vanished after being spotted near the property. Then another, and another. But here's the thing, people disappeared on the frontier all the time. Accidents happened, bandits attacked. Travelers got lost and died of exposure. No one connected the dots. No one suspected the friendly family selling groceries. The Benders refined their system. It was horrifyingly simple. A lone traveler would arrive. Kate would greet them, warm and welcoming. If they had money, and the Benders could tell by the quality of their horse, their clothes, their wagon, they'd be invited to stay for dinner. The guest would sit at the table, back to the canvas curtain. The family would make small talk, sometimes for hours, waiting for the right moment. Then, when the victim was relaxed, distracted, one of the men, usually John Jr., would step behind the curtain. He'd raise a hammer. One swing. The back of the skull. The victim would drop instantly. Then they'd drag the body through a trap door hidden in the floor, down into a shallow cellar. Throats were slit to finish the job and drain the blood. The body would be stripped of valuables, cash, jewelry, watches, anything useful. Later, under cover of darkness, they'd bury the corpse in the garden behind the cabin. By morning, there'd be no trace, just another traveler who never made it to the next town. But the Benders made mistakes. They got greedy. They got sloppy. Neighbors started noticing things. The terrible smell that hung around the property, even in winter. The way the Benders would suddenly have new horses or equipment, but no visitors. One neighbor, a man named Rudolf Brockman, stopped by the inn in early 1872. He was invited to sit at the usual spot back to the curtain, but something felt wrong. He saw Kate glance at her father. He saw John Jr. disappear behind the canvas. Instinct kicked in. Brockman stood up abruptly, made an excuse, and left. He later told friends he was certain the family had been about to kill him. But even then, even with suspicion growing, no one did anything. The frontier rewarded minding your own business. Then, in October 1872, a man named William McCrotty stopped at the Benders Inn. He sat down for dinner. The hammer came down. But McCrotty was built like a bull-thick skull, strong neck. The first blow didn't kill him. He lunged forward, screaming. John Jr. panicked and hit him again. And again. It took 5 blows to finish him. The noise was terrible. A neighbor a quarter-mile away heard the commotion, but assumed it was an animal being slaughtered. McCrotty's body was dumped in the cellar like all the others, but the Benders were rattled. They never had anyone fight back before. Everything changed in March 1873. Dr. William York, a respected physician from Independence, Kansas, set out on a trip to visit his brother in Fort Scott. York was well-known, well-liked, connected to powerful people. He stopped at the Bender Inn on March 9th. He was never seen again. When York didn't arrive in Fort Scott, his brother Colonel Alexander York, a state legislator, immediately organized a search. This wasn't some nameless drifter. This was a man with resources, with influence. Colonel York assembled a posse and swept through Labette County, questioning everyone along the Osage Trail. Before leaving, one of the posse members noticed something strange. The soil in the garden behind the cabin looked disturbed, and there was a faint, sickening smell in the air. But they left without searching further. If you love dark, real stories from the Old West, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps a lot. And now, back to the case. Colonel York returned with a larger group on May 5th. The dirt floor of the cellar was soaked black with dried blood. Clotted blood had pooled in the corners. Hair and fragments of bone were embedded in the soil. They started digging in the garden. Within hours, they found the first body, then another, then another. By the end of the day, they'd uncovered 11 bodies. Men, women, and one child, a little girl about 8 years old, buried next to her father. Some victims had been there for over a year. The bodies were in various states of decomposition, making identification nearly impossible. But they found Dr. York. His skull had been caved in from behind. His pockets were empty. He'd been killed for the cash in his wallet and the watch in his coat. But here's what haunted investigators most. 11 bodies were found, but the garden was full of disturbed soil. Neighbors reported dozens of travelers stopping at the Benders' property over the years. Some estimates put the real death toll at over 20, maybe 30. But the spring rains and the prairie soil had erased the evidence. We'll never know the true number. The Bender cabin became a crime scene unlike anything America had seen. Newspapers across the country ran front-page stories. The New York Times called it the most horrific murder case in frontier history. Artists sketched the cabin, the trap door, the bloody cellar. Thousands of people descended on the property, morbid curiosity seekers who wanted to see the house of horrors. They looted everything. They tore apart the cabin for souvenirs. Within weeks, the entire structure was gone, piece by piece, carried off by crowds. The Bender name became infamous. But the Benders themselves, they were ghosts. Massive manhunts were launched. posses swept through Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas. Wanted posters offered huge rewards, $1,000 per family member, a fortune in 1873. Sightings were reported everywhere. A family matching their description was seen boarding a train in Thayer, Kansas, then in St. Louis, then in Texas. Some claimed they'd fled to Mexico. Others said they made it to San Francisco and took a ship to Europe. Every lead went cold, but the most disturbing theory, that vigilante justice found them first. In the months after the murders were discovered, rumors spread that a secret group of Labette County men had tracked the Benders down, lynched them, and buried the bodies in an unmarked grave. Some claimed Kate was burned alive. Others said all four were shot and dumped in a ravine. But no proof ever surfaced. No bodies, no confessions, just whispers. In 1889, two women were arrested in Michigan, a mother and daughter who looked like Elvira and Kate. They were extradited to Kansas, put on trial, but the case fell apart. Witnesses couldn't agree. The women were released. In 1902, a man in Idaho claimed on his deathbed that he'd been part of the vigilante group that killed the Benders in 1873. He described their deaths in detail. But again, no evidence, just another ghost story. The bloody Benders were never officially found. Not by the law, not by bounty hunters, not by anyone. They simply vanished into the vast, lawless frontier for killers who had murdered for pocket change and disappeared like smoke. So what do we take from this nightmare? The Bender case is more than just a gruesome true crime story. It's a window into the reality of the Old West, a place where isolation, desperation, and the absence of law created perfect conditions for predators. Out there on the prairie, a family of killers could operate for years, murdering travelers who trusted them, who had no choice but to trust them. And when the bodies were finally uncovered, the killers could walk away and vanish into a frontier so vast and chaotic that finding them was impossible. But here's what keeps me up at night. We know about 11 victims. We know their names, or at least some of them. But how many more are still out there, buried in unmarked graves along forgotten trails? How many families never knew what happened to their fathers, their sons, their daughters? The Benders killed for money. Sure, but they also killed because they could. Because no one was watching. Because the frontier swallowed secrets whole. And maybe that's the most terrifying part. Not the hammer, not the trap door, not even the blood-soaked cellar. It's the fact that they got away with it. For monsters walked into the American wilderness and were never seen again. Justice never came. The victims never got peace. The bloody Benders won. If you want more true stories from the darkest corners of the Old West, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, city and country? And don't go anywhere, there's another Old West nightmare waiting for you in the next video.